Well, I'm Jeremy Plant. I'm professor of public policy and administration at Penn State University. I've been there for 25 years, and I have a PhD in government from the University of Virginia. And I spent most of my career teaching graduate courses in public administration, public policy, homeland security, and with a particular focus on transportation policy, and really since 9/11 on transportation security and the impact of the 9/11 attacks on our transportation system. I, was always attracted to government, to politics. At one time I thought that I would either be a staffer or actually run for office, but then I decided I was better at studying it than doing it. I did have a stint when I was very young. Really kind of whetted my appetite. I had a chance when I was a junior in college to spend most of that year here in Washington, and I was an intern at the Senate Commerce Committee and the now defunct Interstate Commerce Commission. So even then I had an interest in transportation, so I focused my opportunities in that year, it was 1966, so it was a long time ago, on transportation policy things. So that really kind of got me started and said this is the area I really want to focus on when I continue through graduate school. I mean, in academia, of course, you have more control over your own time and your own career. You can decide what you're going to study, what you're going to write about. You don't necessarily have to punch the clock. I've always tried to be in public universities because I always thought that the public service focus was important. I've always tried to be in universities and have been in universities that are around major centers of government activity, because that way I can connect theory and practice. I don't consider myself a theoretician. I'm much more interested in the practical side of government governance. And I just, again, have got this passion for transportation-related subjects, and particularly railroads, but also the other modes of transportation. And I just find that they're exciting because it's so tangible. I mean, they're out there, they're physical kinds of programs we're talking about, and I find that they're aesthetically interesting too. I think, there's artistry when you watch a plane take off, or when you watch a train and a beautiful sunset light or something going by. So I've just had that kind of passion. And I've been fortunate at a very young age, again, to be kind of allowed to see how the inner workings of government work in these areas, and to take that as part of my education. I was attracted to both higher education. My father was a lifelong administrator at a private university, engineering school. And so it's, in a sense, it's sort of the family business, and I was able, from a young age, almost growing up on a college campus, so that I was always a good student, and I always felt that I would do something that would use my intellectual capabilities. I was also interested in government and politics from a fairly early age. My father, who wasn't really a politician, but he did end up being an elected official in our small township, and he was always a very good citizen. And my mother as well, was set up the first library in town. So we had kind of a public service orientation, I think. They both won one of those Jefferson Awards for community service years ago. And I had, as it turned out, in the small town I grew up in, I had a good family friend who ended up being elected to Congress. He didn't serve there for his whole career. He was a lawyer, but he was a close family friend. We had other friends that were state senators and that, and we lived close to the capital of New York State, so it was one of my boyhood friends. His father was the chauffeur for Nelson Rockefeller when he was governor of New York, and I got to meet Mr. Rockefeller, Governor Rockefeller, a couple of times, and so I had this, as I said, I've always felt blessed that I've had this opportunity. I had this opportunities at a very young age to see the inner side of something that I knew I could study, but might have studied from the outside. So I could study both from the outside in and from the inside out, really. I think that made a difference. Of course, I didn't fully know at 7th grade or even in high school the way my life would go, but I tried to direct it, and I guess you might say that I've been probably more of a straight line person than a lot. I didn't have too many zigs and zags along the way. I chose the school that I went to as an undergrad because I knew that they had this program in Washington and I wanted to be part of that, and I did that. I went to graduate school at Virginia because it was fairly close to Washington, and it gave me access back up here. And I've always worked, again, in places where there were a lot of people that really were in the game, you might say. So not college towns, but places where important decisions were being made. So it's been a good ride. The first really major grant that I ever got was when I was at George Mason University in Northern Virginia. And of course, if anyone's been to the Washington area, you know that traffic was a big problem. And so we set up a Transportation Institute. Actually, we started with a grant, and that grant led to the creation of the Institute. But we had been approached by a number of people in the Northern Virginia community, developers, major developers, elected officials, people in the county and city government there in Fairfax County, saying, look, we've got to do something about a transportation problem, and the state of Virginia is not giving us adequate funds. Where do we go from there? Can we use your expertise? And they also said, the university is the logical place within our community for honest brokering. So it was a neutral site where the developers could work with the politicians and not be accused of conflicts of interest, where the Democrats and the Republicans could come together, where the federal government folks, could be invited over to talk to the local government and so forth. So that was really exciting. We got about a $1 million grant, and we worked very hard on two things. One, kind of designing a better highway and transportation system for the region, and then working on ways and really analyzing what the cost would be if we adjusted the fiscal situation, particularly if we got a dedicated tax of some kind to be put into a transportation fund. As it turned out, and things were going very, very well on that. As it turned out, I had an opportunity then to go to another university, the university I'm at now. So I had to leave it before everything was fleshed out. But I can go back there now and say, we helped plant the seeds for the modernization of the road system, for rationalization of the way that the costs were allocated, and really helped the region develop into what it is, which is one of the richest and highest employment areas in the country. So that was really exciting. The developers said, we're willing to pay for highway improvements if, or pay part of it, put money in, if we can say that this is going to be done in a certain way and all that. So I can go back there now and say, here's a highway interchange that came about largely because of this work. Here is a way that a major employer in the area, has been able to build something. So again, what I like about transportation-related projects like this is that they lead to real change, both in the physical environment, you might say, the physical context of society, and then also, the way people go to work every day, the way people, get a job, how they get to school. So these things are very real. I mean, it's real, theory converted to practice, or, changing the world for the better. I was part of a team that worked to create a much better way that people could move around Northern Virginia, get to work. I've also been part of, I was working with another colleague in business. I was part of a study that was funded that addressed the issues of how railroads could be made more secure after 9/11. I think that led to some significant changes in how the federal government worked. I've been able to chair a homeland security program that's brought together very senior leaders, including Admiral Loy, the former head of the TSA, and that to look at how homeland security policy can be improved. So I think, again, the passion for public service, when you're an academic, you can either decide to be a theoretician and speak to just the academic audience, or you can say, I want to use the knowledge that I have to speak both to that audience, but also to kind of stimulate that audience to work with you to change the world for the better. I mean, public service is always a project that's never going to end. I mean, there is no end goal there that says you've reached it, this is the perfect state of affairs. I think you're constantly saying, how can I improve things? How can I make the adjustments? Let's say after 9/11, where railroads really, no one thought about railroad security. All of a sudden now we're saying we're moving dangerous cargoes. We're, running trains close together. What happens if the signals are interfered with? So for all these things that could in some way or another impede the security of people, and these things have real consequences. No, I just encourage people not necessarily to follow my career path, but to think about public service. If you want to look back, and I'm at a point now where I can look back, and you want to say, did I make a difference? Did I get involved in significant things? I mean, I can look back and say, you know, some other examples, when I was working in, as a very young person, 20 years old, and as a young staffer in the Senate Commerce Committee. I mean, I had brown bag lunch one time with Ralph Nader. I was the main person working on highway safety legislation. I mean, at 20 years old, I obviously had to route my staff work up through the people that actually made these decisions, but I could see some specific things that came out of that. Some of the changes in automobile design and all that were very much a part of the research that I handed in at that time. I had an opportunity to work on a couple of major cases. I just was kind of working as a special assistant at the ICCAE to one of the commissioners, again in that same time I was in Washington, on railroad merger issues. So look back and say these things are important, you know, to not only to you individually, but these things had consequence in the society you live in. And if you have a sense of duty to the public, or you want to serve the public, academia, you know, training the leaders and the workers, or you can actually be there in the trenches and public service, and everything you're going to work on is important. I mean, we've given all the hard problems to the public sector. So, you know, and I live in this town of Hershey, Pennsylvania. It's a wonderful town. People make candy there, but sometimes I say to myself, you know, is it more important to work and make candy bars, or is it more important to do something for the immediate benefit of the public? So.